Dr. Knudsen mentions this in his journals, and a very like third person sort of way, like it doesn't affect him. So it's kind of an odd thing for a man to be talking about his child being died. But we'll go in here, even though a whole lot hadn't happened in here, but who knows what's going to go on. Now this building is one of our crown jewels of originality, or being original I should say. In there you'll see the tongue and groove ceiling all the way down to the pecan wood floors. In most cases is still original to the building. Even some of the plaster on the walls and some of the panes of glass in the window are still original. So if there's residual energy in here, perhaps maybe it would be this building. But this is the court-martial room. We talked about the guardhouse. This would be the step before the guardhouse. Whatever you did to get you in trouble would get you in here, and then the guardhouse. So again, this is a lot of original fixtures in here, from the ceiling, the plaster on the walls, and even the pecan floor. You can tell how beat up the floor is, not even as you walk on it. But this is a 140-year-old floor, or so. Any questions? I don't know if I'm doing a good job or such a bad job that you don't have any questions. You walk this way. This is kind of an interesting story I should tell y'all while we're here. But you know the town of Santa Ana? It's kind of similar to the town of San Angelo because the original name got changed a bit. Y'all know that it used to be called Santa Angela, right? After Bart DeWitt. And he worked out here at the fort, and he wanted to honor his wife who had passed on, so he named the town Santa Angela after her. And so over the years it became San Angelo. Well, originally Santa Ana was Satanta. And why would the name of town San Satanta? Well, he was a Kiowa Indian chief at that time. One of the most clever, a very good adversary for these soldiers at Fort Concho. It's not such a scary story, but it's very interesting, so I do want to tell you all this. As Satanta ranged the area from Fort Griffin to Fort Concho down to Fort McCavitt and so, he started noticing some interesting things. He noticed that the horse soldiers would be out in the field practicing maneuvers and stuff. And each time a certain song was played on the bugle, they would all do a certain thing. For example, he would hear one song and all the soldiers would go to the right and then make a hooking motion. He'd go to Fort Griffin, hear that same song, and the soldiers would do the same thing. Wherever fort he went to, that same song would produce the same results. And he noticed that each song had different results and different, whatever the soldiers would do. So he found a bugle, and he learned how to play that, well enough that the first time he used engagement, he was finding some soldiers from Fort Concho and Fort Griffin. And he waited for their first bugle call. He played a contrary bugle call and caught that group of soldiers in an ambush. And may have made a difference, but it wasn't too long ago that the American Army had learned guerrilla warfare to beat the British. So it just took a little adapting before they caught on to all that. But it's a pretty interesting story. I wanted to let y'all know that. If you look at these window panes on the upper windows, you can see they have ripples and bubbles. That's more the original features of this building. So we really do like this building. It's a shame the storm of '95 destroyed a bunch of panes of glass that had soldiers' initials, the last officer to leave here. This would be good remembrance to have, but they no longer exist except for one. Now before y'all come through here, I want to show you some other residual stuff. The soldiers would come in here and usually they were being sent to talk to the commanding officer and the adjutant. And so they reported this desk right here and then turned this way or that way. But in the floor is a depression. As each soldier came in and got his orders, he would pivot on his heel and head that direction. So you can tell, just put your foot here, it's kind of dark. Let's see if we can get a shadow on it. But there's an impression in the floor from all those soldiers turning their heel there. So a lot of soldiers spent a lot of time in this building. And some people say that spirits don't necessarily haunt where they died, but just where they spent the most time, or had the better time. So who knows? All right, man. It's kind of weird.
Oh, where it's indented right here?
Right there. Just run your foot over there and you can feel it, definitely.
Oh, yeah. So that's where they were standing?
Well, they stand there and they turn on their heel one way or the other to go that way or that way.
Yeah.
Adjutant's that way, commanding officer would be that way.
Oh, wow.
But anybody in here was on official business. They had to be in the correct uniform and everything.
Huh.
And it's give them a chance to sit here and clean up before they had to go talk to their...
That's neat. Thanks for showing us.
And that's one of the things that I would never have known about, except one of our longtime docents pointed that out.
Yeah, I've never known. I've been here all...
Because it was always covered up with a rug. Now, a few items in this room here are original to the time before. Like we've got this footlock over here from one of the officers, a Major Vance. And another thing is the legacy of the men who worked in this room. A lot of the men that worked in here was basically a battle room or a war room. They'd get all their maps gathered up, and they would compare them before they went on an expedition. So you can imagine how important these maps would be. Now, it's the odd thing about West Texas, and some of y'all may know this, but a river that once runs really good in the springtime may be completely dried up in the fall time. Same thing, a watering hole that's there in the wintertime may be gone in the summertime. So they needed valuable, very good maps of each season. So when they went out, they knew where all the good watering holes were. And if y'all have ever heard about the Buffalo Soldier tragedy of 1877, their maps weren't very good at all. And then you're speaking in a very bad state of affairs. On that trip, they had 4 soldiers die, a lot of horses, just a lot of men's careers were ruined, and besides the men losing their lives, ended up drinking horse blood and things like that just to stay alive, but they made it back. And that was one of those things, their deaths preceded them here. All these men were assumed dead, and then when a couple soldiers come struggling in to tell them that they were out there still, and it was kind of like a temporary rejoice because they didn't know if they were still alive at this point, but at least they weren't completely dead. And that happened. Again, these soldiers out here went out and helped rescue them. And they would team up with the Kiowa Indians and do some horrible things around here to the ranchers and other community people. And it's just one of those things that happened historically that it's kind of hard to pinpoint when everything started happening. But for the longest time, I think from 69 to about 75, the 4th Cavalry was here and other forts in Texas, and their predominant role was to take Quanah Parker and the Comanches and put them on a reservation, peaceably if possible, and with war otherwise. A lot of people underestimate this Indian War period time because you compare the Civil War to the Revolutionary War and the Napoleonic Wars where huge armies clash, and each time the muskets fired, 10,000 men fell dead. The Indian War period was a little bit different. It was a lot of guerrilla war fighting, so you'd have 20 men facing against 30 men. Maybe 3 guys would die that day, but somebody did emerge the victor. Now, over a period of years, they did keep attacking and trying to find the Comanches' main hideout, which ended up being in Paladero Canyon. And over a series of different battles and engagements, they almost fought them to a standstill, but Quanah Parker would always bring his people back. For one example was they stole all the horses, and they're going to bring them back to Fort Concho, Fort Griffin, and resupply the forts with those. But in the middle of the night, Quanah Parker and his men came and stole almost all those horses, including Colonel Mackenzie's prized horse. And then, so a couple of years later, they did the same thing and attacked Paladero Canyon, captured all the horses, and then rode off with those. And some of y'all may have heard the story. It's a very horrible story, but you can see maybe from the soldier's standpoint why it had to be done. They killed 1,200 horses and left them in Toole Canyon up there around that same area by Childress, Matador, or Quanah. They have a town named Quanah up there as well. So they did that, took away the Comanches' legs. And all the while, from 1871 to 1875, buffalo hunters and the soldiers were taking out the buffalo. So you take away the enemy's legs and commissary or their food, and you pretty much defeated them. And this is what they were trying to do, is keep them on the reservation to stop, all their depredations. And so Quanah Parker ended up going on the reservation after all, and him and Mackenzie became very good friends at this point. He helped him track down his family. Anybody familiar with Quanah Parker's history? His parentage? Well, his mother was named Cynthia Ann Parker, and she lived at a family fort called Fort Parker, down by the Austin area. Peter Nakona, another Comanche war chief, was in the area, and they raided that fort and took a bunch of captives, and Cynthia Ann was one of those. Well, she became his wife, and 18 years later, she was forced